Require, that function does more though than just help you grab your own custom modules. Let's look at requiring native or core modules in Node.js. I opened back up the Node.js source code that we dived into. That's what's called when the require function is called. You might remember that we get the file name. You might remember that the module is cached, and so it looks at the path and the full file name and caches it. But after that, the require function ultimately ends up asking a question. Is the thing you've asked for a native module? And if it is, that's what it actually returns. Otherwise, it then goes and does some other things. So what does that mean? Well, a native module is essentially the things that you saw in that lib folder, the JavaScript core, that JavaScript side of the code that comes along for the ride with Node.js. So for starters, how can we learn about what these different core native modules that are already given to us, do? Well, you can go to nodejs.org, the Node.js website, and go to the API documentation. So in this case, I'll go to Docs and API. And here's the table of contents, and this shows you the various core modules, the Node API as it's called, the code that I have available to me that comes along for the ride in Node that I can use. They have a variety of features. For example, we've already used console. So some of them are what's called global, meaning they're just there, like console. I can just use it. But others aren't global, like this one, utilities. How can I use it? Well, for starters, as a Node.js developer, you should read this. You should read the API documentation and be familiar with this core code that comes along for the ride in Node. And we're going to take a look at even more of these as we go through the course. But for starters, how do we go out and grab some of this code, the things that aren't global? Well, what do you think? With the require function, of course. We already saw that if it sees that the string that you pass to it is a native module, it will use it. So if I want the utilities, I need to require the appropriate thing. Now you can look this up in the API documentation, and we can see here inside lib that utilities is util.js. That's in the Node core. And we remember that require will add on the .js for us. I don't need the / because the / is telling me to look in the folder that I'm in, that I'm running this program in. But instead, I'm just saying I want this .js file, and if it matches the name of a native JS file, then that's what it uses. So this is all I need, and I now have an object that contains all of the niceties within that utilities feature built into Node. For example, if you read the API documentation for utilities, you'll see that it has a bunch of methods that have just useful things to make my coding life easier. Some of those JavaScript core components, as we talked about before, actually are wrappers to calling C++ code. But some of it isn't. Some of it is just pure JavaScript code that I could write myself, but why bother because it's already there. For example, let's say I wanted to build a string. I'll put my name as a variable, and then I wanted to say hello my name. And instead of doing a lot of pluses and concatenating strings or other methodologies that are new in ES6, I could say this. I could use the .format method, which takes the string with replace codes. And then I do a list separated by commas of variables, and it will replace each of these in the order that it appears. And then I could log this to the console using util.log instead of console.log. What does that do? Well, it just, if I clear this, it does a normal console log, but it adds a timestamp. And look, my string was created. That's just an example. But as we go through this course, we'll be using lots of different core modules, and we'll grab that code via require. And the API documentation will tell us what comes back from require and how we can use it. So don't be worried about the require statement when it's something that isn't something that looked familiar. Especially if you don't see the // it might be a core module. Now there's even more that require does, but we're going to see that a little bit later in the course. For now, we see that require lets us pull in our own custom modules and core modules from Node.js, like the utilities module, util.js. Oh, and you might be thinking, well, what if I name my own custom module the same name as the core.js file? Well, remember, if it's a custom module, you specify the location, the // or a folder above with // or whatever the case, you're saying that it's local. If you don't, then Node is going to look for a native module and some other processes we'll see later. So it's actually okay if you name it the same, but I don't recommend it because you can end up causing yourself confusion between using the core module and your module and back and forth and accidentally type the wrong one. So I think it's more trouble than it's worth. There's never really a real need to name something the exact same name as a core module. So personally, I would avoid it. All right, so that is core modules, native modules in Node.js. Very simple by just using require.